My name is Michael Albert, and I am the host of the podcast that's titled RevolutionZ. This is to be our 306th episode, and my guest this time is Peter Bohmer. Peter has been an activist in movements for transformative and radical social change since 1967. These have included anti-racist organizing and solidarity with the people of Vietnam, Southern Africa, Cuba, Palestine, Central America, Mexico, and against U.S. imperialism and intervention. For this activism and teaching, he was targeted by the FBI. He taught political economy at the Evergreen State College from 1987 to 2021. His current focus now is Palestine solidarity and organizing for an arms embargo against Israel. Peter and I have been close friends for about 60 years. Imagine that. We met at MIT, where we were both enrolled and engaged in all manner of mayhem. And from then to now, about the mayhem aspect and our political commitments, I guess not too much has changed. So, Peter, welcome.
Welcome, Michael. Good to see you.
Perhaps we can begin in the Mideast with the unfolding Israeli genocidal agenda. What the Israelis have been doing is, I assume, well known to listeners. Why they are doing it is less clear, as is what to do about it. So first, what do you think, Peter, the Israelis' government's aim in Gaza is?
Okay, I want to say first, the war and the Israeli genocidal policies were really brought home to me the night before last when Ramsey Baroud, who's a friend of Z Network, that I'm a friend of also, his sister was killed in central Gaza by a U.S. made bomb that Israeli dropped. So again, just really, I don't know, just thinking about this, how, representing 42,000 people officially killed by Israel, probably a lot more. And that doesn't include the West Bank and Lebanon and so on. So, in terms of why, your question is why the U.S. is supporting Israel.
No. My question was, what do you think the Israeli government's aim in Gaza is? Just in Gaza.
Okay, so talking about Gaza first, I don't think the majority aim of the Netanyahu government is to repopulate and colonize Gaza. It seems to me what the aim is to destroy Hamas, which is impossible because Hamas is much more than a military group. It's a military, political, social service group. And then secondly, to make this really tiny area of Gaza, which is 150 square miles, to maybe have a unpopulated zone by Palestinians and have Israeli troops there on all the boundaries near Israel. So it's basically an Israeli occupation of Gaza, of military, but not of population. I think that's the aim, and it's continuing. And it just meant incredible destruction of the infrastructure, hospitals, educational system, writers, the people of Gaza.
I don't understand something. If the goal is to, get a zone that's unpopulated between Israel and the people in Gaza, the people that would be in Gaza, it's not obvious to me in that case why you have to do all the destruction that they've done, especially the totally civilian-oriented destruction. On the other hand, some people say the goal is to get rid of the Palestinians. The goal is either to kill them or to drive them off so the Palestine problem, at least with Gaza, dissipates. But you're saying you don't think that it goes that far. Is that right?
Okay, so sadly, the government of Israel, and I would say a large part of the population, doesn't see Palestinians as human beings. It's no concern what happens to them, which is very, very troubling. It's often true of aggressive war makers like Israel. It's also, I think, so there's no chance of a thriving community there, and in Gaza, I would say also in the West Bank. It's trying to not clear everybody, but making it so that people, have to leave. So I do think decreasing the population is part of it. Again, where can people go? Egypt clearly has basically closed its borders with Gaza because Gaza borders Egypt, and one of the points now is Israel has they call it the Philadelphia Corridor. They have troops along the border with Egypt, making it even harder for people to leave.
So then what about the aim in the West Bank, where violence has now picked up considerably?
Yeah, I mean, Israel is really involved in 3 wars. I think Gaza is still the center, like you asked me about. Also, a war. Uh, it's kind of in between a police action and a war in the West Bank. Almost 1,000 Palestinians have been killed, including a really wonderful woman who just graduated from the University of Washington, Aisha Egi, who was there with the International Solidarity Movement, was standing there and was shot in the head by an Israeli sniper near Beta, one of the towns in the West Bank. And it seems, and this goes back to probably the 40s, that Israel really wants to control the whole area. And again, they want to control the area, but they don't want to give the Palestinians their citizenship. They're very worried that there won't be a Jewish majority. And if you add Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Palestinians within the Israeli borders, that what they created in 48, it's already about half the population. So I think it's, again, slowly reducing the population and control of the land, but without giving the people their citizenship. And again, trying to induce people to leave. I mean, some of the even more fascist ministers than Netanyahu, like Smotrich, the finance minister, Ben Gvir, the security minister, they've talked openly about a total ethnic cleansing of the
Yeah.
West Bank.
Yeah. Okay, and then they're expanding further into Lebanon and Iran. This is where it starts to get confusing, at least in my mind. What exactly does Israel think it's going to accomplish by these additional steps?
I mean, it
Confusing in
seems
your mind, too.
It seems so crazy. I mean, this goes back a little bit to the Obama presidency, 2008 to 2016, where the U.S. Signed an agreement uh, with Iran about Iran not developing nuclear weapons in return for having sanctions lifted, having more normal relations with the rest of the world. Israel was very much against it, and to Netanyahu's credit, to Obama's credit, he pushed it through anyway, and Trump rescinded it. So, I think Trump is at least as much of a warmonger with regards to Iran uh, than the Israelis. And Israel, I'm confused whether Israel wants a war with Iran or is very willing to risk it. I think it's one of those two. And sadly, the U.S. has abetted it. And probably, the Israeli kind of desire is to have an area that Israel is kind of the dominant power there, and hopefully maybe allied with some of the really the kingdom, some of the really kind of kingdom dictatorial governments there, such as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and seeing defeating Iran as part of it. Yeah, the war into Lebanon, let me just speak briefly about that. Over 2,000 people have been killed in a tiny country. Lebanon's been in an economic crisis for at least 6 years. And Hezbollah, which formed in 1982, Israel was involved, 1,000 troops in Lebanon. In September 82, over 2,000 Palestinians were killed in a Shatilan suburb. They were killed by a group called the Phalange, a fascist, it means fascist Phalange, Lebanese group with Israeli troops around them. And Israel's been fighting with Hezbollah, which formed in 82. Since then, they did launch rockets into Israel beginning October 8th, the day Israel started bombing Gaza. And to me, it's been an act of solidarity. You know, I mean, Hezbollah is not my ideal group, but it is, it does have a lot of support, particularly among the Shia population, which is about 35-40% of the population in Lebanon. And again, Israel's pagers September assassinating leaders of Hezbollah, including Nasrallah, uh, just seems an incredibly terrorist war against the people of Lebanon, and again, way beyond just Hezbollah. And again, Israel seems to want to clear the area uh, and also destroy Hezbollah strategy there. But the Lebanese people are kind of collateral damage, and again, Israel very, very unconcerned about that.
Okay, so then we come to the United States, and we have the United States arming, alibying, abetting, cheerleading. I mean, it really is, in some sense, in some very real sense, even though there's tension there, an Israeli U.S. operation. And the question arises, uh, what is the U.S. motive? Not the motive that has existed for, you know, decades upon decades of having a client, a powerful military client in the Mideast, but the motive for going as far as this thing is now going and not stopping it, which presumably the U.S. could do.
It's a little bit hard for me to understand, going back to the 60s, after the 67 war, and very influenced by Noam Chomsky. The idea was that more Israel was serving U.S. imperialist interests to control the Middle East, to prevent any kind of nationalist governments that had the crazy idea that the oil, for example, in Iraq belonged to the Iraqi people rather than to U.S. and Western oil companies. So Israel playing that role, and they certainly have done it, but that sees basically Israel doing more what the U.S. wants. And obviously, I think it's both ways. With the support for Gaza, it seems, yeah, I mean, from the beginning, the U.S. has been totally supporting with weapons in the International Court of Justice at the UN and just playing an abominable role. And even to me, the lies where on May 31st, Biden made a proposal, which the UN Security Council accepted, calling for basically three stages. In the second stage, that it'd be a full ceasefire. All the Israeli hostages would be returned to Israel, and a lot of Palestinian prisoners would be released. Hamas fully accepted the deal. They said they accept, and they've said so basically since sometime in June. But the United States keeps saying that Hamas is the outlier. Well, Israel has said they accept a temporary ceasefire, and the sticking point is Hamas said they want a permanent ceasefire, which again isn't guaranteed. But
Yeah.
again, the United States, I think, again, being the ideological support of Israel. And so to me, unconscionable. And with Lebanon and Iran, it seems almost even worse that the United States provided intelligence for the killing of some of the leaders of Hezbollah and maybe even the civilian Hamas leader who was killed in Iran by Israel, that it seems very likely the U.S. was involved with that too. I don't fully understand it. I don't think, like I was saying earlier, with Obama signing the treaty, even though it hasn't been restored under the Biden, Blinken, Harris administration, Sullivan Security Council, but it seems the U.S. hasn't really wanted a war with Iran. But again, all the statements saying they back Israel, and maybe Biden discussing with Netanyahu what Israel should bomb, leaving aside the assassinations, the mass murder, the bombings, the continual bombings in not only the South Lebanon, but also around Beirut, which has led to maybe close to 1 million Lebanese people having to flee their homes, getting a warning Israel is going to attack those places. So it seems the U.S. doesn't support it uh, verbally for sure. I don't think they even want it, but they're not willing. Again, this is hard for me to understand. Even though it could cost Harris the election, they're not willing to break with Israel. 40,000 U.S. troops, and which is a large increase, are now in the Mediterranean, including new aircraft carriers, destroyers, a lot of jet fighter planes. It's really a major, major escalation by the U.S. in the Middle East, making it clear they're there to, quote, defend Israel. One last comment, Michael, on this. One of the things that bothers me most in this war now, which is over a year old, and really a lot more, but the shooting war, let's say, beginning October 8th, is that whether it's Lebanon, Iran, Gaza, Israel keeps saying they're doing it to defend themselves. And to me, I
Yeah.
find this thing of self-defense, which Harris, Biden keep repeating, like just so obscene to me, calling it defense. I mean,
It's
Hitler called it
it's
defense too when he went into Czechoslovakia and other places too.
right. Everybody does that. And yet, in some ways, this seems even more blatant. I mean, we both experienced Indochina and Vietnam, and there's something different about this. It's not killing as many people. It's
Right.
not, it's nothing like that scale, at least yet. But there's something overt and blatant, and I don't know what to call it. Yeah, it's like you're bragging over the corpses. I mean, it's just really incredible. And so, given that motives of Israel and the U.S. aside, the reality of what's happening is evident, is visible, is disgusting, and lots of people are uh, outraged by it, sickened by it, but also outraged by it. And so the question arises, uh, what do those people do? What is the activity in the U.S. by people horrified by what's going on in the Mideast, the U.S. role, and also just the events themselves? What do they do?
You mean what should we do, or what
Yeah,
are we doing?
I don't mean no. I really mean what should we do, or what can have an impact? Not what do we do just to express ourselves, but what do we do to actually have some kind of effect on the outcomes?
Okay, I want to make one small correction on what you said first.
Ah,
The bombing in Gaza, it's a year. Certainly in the first few months, it's probably more intense. Well, it's certainly equal to maybe the Christmas bombing. Do you remember 1972, the
yeah,
U.S. did Vietnam? The level of bombing, the destruction, it's a shorter period, but it's definitely higher than any war since Vietnam. And
yeah. Per
just look,
capita, it is. I mean, it's
not
sort of like a per capita calculation, right, or a per land area.
I mean, it really is, even maybe absolutely. I mean, it really is the amount of bombing. Various studies I've seen said it's absolutely not just per person. The bombing, is at that
Yeah,
level. So so it really is almost
astounding.
unprecedented.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. In terms of what should we do, I have, as you said, I've been involved for a long time in kind of various anti-intervention, anti-war solidarity movements. I have been inspired, impressed by the global movement against, I call it Israeli and U.S. war against Palestine because I include the West Bank, which is really like low intensity war. And the U.S. is so involved in terms of advisors. I think the U.S. military very connected to the Israeli military too. So I think the movement has forced the rhetoric to change the Biden administration, but not really the policies, right? Nowhere near an arms embargo. There was a temporary stop of those 2,000-pound bombs, but then they've continued. And, again, public opinion polls, I don't think maybe it's a big issue to a lot of people, but over half of the population, I believe, certainly among Democrats and independents, support a full arms embargo, which I think is a very, very important demand. Not just no aid, but all weapons going to Israel. I don't have any easy answers. In Olympia, we have a pretty good group called Palestine Action of South Sound. We've been meeting over a year. We have over 200 people have come to our meetings. We usually have 60 to 70 people come. We've raised over $50,000 for the kind of children of Gaza, a lot of forums, educational events, and it has an impact, not clearly enough, and maybe in other countries even more. Macron just announced in France at least a partial arms embargo of Israel. I think it's because of the protests there, and even the UK has breaking a little bit from Israel. So I think we need to increase our educational outreach, talk to people, which make them kind of understand more what's going on, sharing some of the knowledge. I think the protests all levels from direct action, for example, in this area, Boeing is very big, and there's a major strike going on by the machinists in Boeing that's now, I believe, a month old. So maybe trying to work with people there, closing down Boeing, other places too, to raise, concept that I've used since the 60s, and you have too, Michael, raising the social cost to the U.S. of supporting this war, increasing the legitimacy of a government that's doing this.
Let me ask the question in a slightly different and maybe for you and definitely for me, somewhat uncomfortable way. There were those activities on the campuses in the spring, before in this past spring. And they were mind-boggling, I thought. There were an incredible number of them. They were incredibly committed and militant. They were sustained. And, it was a situation where there were all these demonstrations inside the United States for people half the world away, in which it was a bit subtle the extent to which the U.S. was engaged in the activity. It's become more and more clear, but still was a bit subtle. So I was surprised by it. I was surprised and pleased by, very happy at the scale of the turnout. I don't know, maybe you are more aware, the extent to which the new season on campuses has begun, and it does not appear to be happening at anything remotely like the same scale. Um, and I don't know why exactly that is. Is it exhaustion? Is it repression? Is it something about the election? Um, was it maybe less sustainable than we thought? What's your reaction? What's your impression?
Okay, I want to go back and then forward. I would say over the last year, two of the most important movements have been the student movement, which you've mentioned, I think, and I agree with what you said, both the past and the present, unfortunately, but also I think
The labor.
large numbers of Jewish people, groups like uh, Jewish Voice for Peace, other groups who've really taken a pretty strong stand against the war, including a lot of direct action that I think have been somewhat effective.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as we both know from the past, it's hard for, let's say, going back to the student movement, sustaining themselves over the summer. I'm sure you can remember that from your experiences. And the this, even though Jewish Voice of Peace and other Jewish groups, like If Not Now, have really challenged the idea that challenging Israel, even being anti-Zionist, which to me means seeing the equality of all people and not Jewish dominance, that rhetoric that the student protests and other ones have been anti-Semitic have really had an effect probably in isolating those movements. I mean, those movements were never close to majority movements at campus. I think, like you said, they were really important. And given the U.S. wasn't having troops there, at least openly,
Yeah.
and they did it in very small numbers, was really impressive, but it wasn't the majority. I think, this rhetoric of anti Semitism, which so much dominates the mass media, that these protests were anti Semitic. I'm sure there were incidences of anti Semitism in any movement, of things that happen. And I think anti Semitism is real, but it's been weaponized so much where, anti Zionism, saying that maybe there should be one state there, Palestine, Israel, that's anti Semitic, to me is wrong, but I think have an effect. It also seems be partly that donors, people give money to these campuses. A lot of them were elite private campuses, or even public universities being worried about state money, has had an effect of more repression. And so temporarily, I hope it's temporarily, I don't know, that the student movement, judging from like the schools I live in, Olympia, Washington, Olympia, Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, they they still exist, but they're much smaller. Uh, they're not encampments from going on now like they were last spring. So I hope it's temporary, but I think both the chill, students, colleges criminalizing even more quickly any kind of protest using the anti Semitic trope, saying these things are anti Semitic, has had an effect.
Yeah. Um, Earlier, quite a bit back, you mentioned the possibility that one of Israel's motives might be to weaken Harris's chances of winning, more accurately, to increase Trump's chances of winning. Um, and I think that is plausible to me. I mean, we can't know it for sure, but it certainly is plausible, and it may well have that effect. And so we come to the question of uh, of the election, which, I mean, they're sort of inextricably, they're not only happening next to each other, but they also are sort of entwined with each other in some ways, as with everything else that's going on. And so the question becomes, I guess, um, to what extent is the horror at what's going on in the Middle East translating into uh, a kind of a mindset which may well help Trump? That is, okay, we shouldn't vote, or we should vote for, third party or whatever, thereby taking votes away from Harris and leaving the likelihood of Trump winning greater. To what extent is that happening? And do you think that it might be the case that the fall off in energy and focus, maybe, of the opposition on campuses is somehow connected to larger numbers not wanting to have that effect, and smaller numbers, in fact, not being upset by that effect? I don't know whether that's clear. I hope it
Yeah,
was.
I think I'm following. I mean, again, maybe in a large issue. Again, I stopped teaching full time in 21, so I'm not on campus so much. I still give a lot of talks on campus and visit various campuses. I would say, from people I know, students, and these tend to be more people who are like open to like left ideas. There's
Right.
such depression about the choice between Harris and Trump. So to me, that's, the overwhelming, somebody, yeah, saying just, they've never felt more kind of down, hopeless in their lives. And this election, you know, adding to, the climate stuff, these hurricanes going on, many, many issues, inequality of income and wealth, people not being able to afford housing, so that's, I think, overarching among people whom I know and read about, yeah, who are activists among younger people, and particularly among Arab Muslim Americans. Uh, Yeah, there's such disgust with Harris not willing to break, with Biden at all. Not even really recognizing any real way the humanity of Palestinians, like not having a Palestinian American speak at the Democratic Convention, which I think has led to this view that, for the most part, that kind of a pox on both your houses. I think a lot is not voting. It isn't just the third party. Uh, Almost nobody I know is saying they're going to support Trump, but they're not voting. The less
Yeah.
enthusiasm is big. And I think what you said, I haven't thought about. Uh, Maybe because, for example, on reproductive rights, there really is a difference that probably a lot of the kind of very liberal students, maybe who might have been more involved in the occupations last year, at least on the outskirts or supportive of it, are supporting the Harris Walz team.
Yeah. I mean, there shouldn't be any contradiction. It ought to be possible. It doesn't stop you. You feel no contradiction, I assume. You might feel nausea, but you don't feel contradiction. Uh, Working for Palestine, working to free Palestine like your shirt, and simultaneously so wanting Trump to lose for what I think ought to be obvious reasons, that you think people in swing states at least should vote for Harris. But for some reason, there are various constituencies that can't seem to accept or embrace the idea that you can seek to stop Trump, seek to stop the war, and do it consistently. And not only do it consistently, but it's one task. That is to say, letting Trump win is far worse for Palestine and every place else than stopping him, just as not working on getting and ending the war is worse. You have to do both. And I don't see why that is so hard for people to grasp, except when I think about when I was
Right.
20. And when I was 20, or whatever age it is, fuck if I know. But, it was Humphrey and Nixon. And neither you, nor I, nor anybody I know or knew even had a thought
Right.
about supporting Humphrey, right? Um, and so now, in one sense, it's much more sophisticated than it was then, because people who are on the left, many of them are simultaneously able to address the real conditions inside the election, and we weren't. But still, it's frustrating.
Yeah. Let me give you, I don't know, some reasons people have said they don't agree with you. Because, Michael and Steve Shalom have written this really interesting 21 Q&A, if I remember the number right, about the elections. And one argument I've heard, which becomes less valid the closer we get to the elections, is that if we openly say, uh, vote for Harris and Walz in swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. I'm in Washington State, which is not really a swing state. If Trump wins in Washington, he'll win the landslide, right? But it's probably not much chance of it. That it doesn't put any pressure on Harris, Walz, their advisors. If we say we're not going to support them, like Nora Ericott, the uh, Palestinian American law professor, is really worthwhile listening to. She was offered a position in the Green Party vice president. She turned it down, but she said, she would support the Democrats if they took a position. And so that makes sense to me. And
Yeah,
very close, some family members, a friend of mine in prison, that's their view that so that makes sense, but it makes less sense the closer you get. It certainly made a lot of sense in July, August, September. Uh, and I think just a thing of I know this friend of mine who's Muslim and super active on Palestine. She says that it's kind of rewarding it, and she would never vote for Harris because we got to break the hold of APEC, which, has had a big influence in defeating, like Bowman and Cory Bush in
Sure.
Congress. So the argument is that that's the way to break the power of APEC. I still think, issues of authoritarianism, the climate, reproductive rights, uh, that it's really important that Trump loses. But uh,
Yeah.
I think among people I work with who are younger, it's still more this thing of you can't just rewarding genocide, is the argument that how can you reward genocide? And genocides, I mean, I think the word really fits here. I was hesitant to use it at first, but I think it really does fit, and it is really horrendous. But we agree. Again, going back to Chomsky and Zinn saying voting is small. The main thing is building movements, and you can do that the day after, the day before, and so on. Voting is really kind of a small thing.
Yeah. Well, in general, voting is almost nothing because it's two peas in a pod. It's Tweedledum and Tweedledee. If there's a significant difference, voting becomes more consequential. If there's a huge difference, and I think there is a huge difference, but people can disagree about this, obviously. But I think there is a huge difference, and in that case, voting is significant. Not all over the place, but certainly in swing states. But there's something strange about when people. I don't know what it is. I don't want to be pro, or don't want to give credence to, or don't want to legitimate genocide.
Like,
So I won't vote for Harris, but in reality, that's a vote for Trump. And I mean, that is, it helps Trump. And if you don't like genocide, and you don't like capitalism, and you don't like racism and all the rest of it, you don't want to help Trump. It's not complicated. This isn't rocket science. Something is getting in the way, and I can understand that because I feel it too. But it is emotion. It's just a gut level response to the disgustingness of what's going on that's getting in the way. It's not reason, or at least I don't think it is. Except in the one case that you mentioned, where there's this strategic notion that maybe we can eke out uh, a a change from Harris if we hold off on saying that we will vote her or support her. But the thing I feared all the way back in July, you can respond to this. Let me know what you think. Even all the way back in July, June, I feared if people don't deal with the necessity of voting, even while holding our nose early, it'll be too late to change the minds of the people in September or October. The people you're talking about had already made up their minds. I'll vote for Trump. I just won't say I'm going to vote for Trump, right? So that I can put the pressure on. But there's lots and lots of other young people out there who hours and minutes and weeks of saying, I'm not going to vote, or I'm going to vote for Stein, would be hard to turn around now in October. We have to try, but it would be hard. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, but Michael, this is, so I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna interview you now. This is the
Uh-oh.
question to So it's connected to what you've been saying. So this is something I don't really get. And I realize, you know, my number of people I'm in touch with are very much on the left. Even though I do try to talk to a lot of other
Sure.
people also. And it seems to me, not just in Michigan, which is, a really important state, I think it's the second biggest of the swing states. So, and some of the Georgia, North Carolina, a little bit smaller than Pennsylvania, that the Democrats not even doing like suspending some offensive arms sales, doing something would gain support. That there really is a Palestine movement. Maybe you and I were overestimating its breadth, right? But still, it is real. And it
Yeah.
seems the strategy, and certainly on Palestine, I would argue the same thing on economic policy. And I can give you some examples of stuff I've been
I,
involved in lately if we have time. that there really is this hunger for a more progressive economics, raise the minimum wage, more
Yeah.
worker rights, but yet the Harris campaign is totally, and Walz too, not any better, neoliberal, militaristic, totally supporting Israel. And it even seems to me in their own terms, it's not a winning strategy. And it's tied
At
to
any
everything.
rate, it's irrational. Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you I mean, I don't know. So that's
I
really, I think even in their own terms.
Yeah. No, before I got on to do this, to talk with you, I was working on an article, and it says
Okay.
exactly the same thing. It
Okay.
basically says, um, everybody says now Harris is trying to win independents and undecideds, and they're even, and this is the part I like, they're even, going into rural areas, knocking on doors and trying to take Trump voters. I actually think that's exemplary. But
I agree.
but for the other stuff, she's tacking to the right. She is saying things going toward the center or the right, really not the majority at the center, right? And I mean, the way I sort of said it is Harris more popular in the swing states right now than Sanders was? In fact, is Sanders right now more popular in those states than
Right.
Harris is? And if the answer is yes, and I suspect the answer is yes, right? Um, then what's Harris doing? But then it goes right back to what's Biden doing. I mean, why are they do seem to have certain things that is it habit? Is it that it's their deepest commitments? Is it that they're afraid of what the media will do to them? So, in other words, if she tacks just a little to the left to get those economic sentiments that you mentioned, I mean, I agree with you. To get the Palestinian sentiments that exist, is she afraid that the media will latch on to that and she'll lose more than she gains? Is it that Machiavellian? I don't know what it is. Right?
But
Just like I don't know why the United States is supporting Israel so much that they might wind up in a world war. I don't get that either.
yeah, I mean, I think it's repeating, even though I know she won the popular vote, the Hillary Clinton strategy with Bill Clinton going back, triangulation, assuming all those people, center left, are going to vote anyway, which I don't think is right. Besides the question of lack of enthusiasm that you talk about a lot.
Right.
But even, for example, I mean, these hurricanes, you know, Helene, Milton. I mean, 5 million people supposed to being asked to move from Florida away from the coasts. And on climate, they've been terrible too. Both Harris and
Yeah.
Walz talking about yes, alternative energy, but we're number one in natural gas, oil, and again thinking about young people whom I know, and I don't just climate's a really big issue, probably bigger than Palestine still. I think they're both
Yeah.
so important about climate justice. But again, I mean, not really giving people at least to be excited. And seems, certainly Trump and Walz the worst drill baby drill stuff. I mean, Trump and Vance, and denying climate change. But the Democrats just seem so not dealing with the issue too. I think both morally be right, but even strategically,
That's
being
what I
able to,
mean.
yeah, that's, yeah. So we're,
But
we're,
there's a sophisticated argument which I don't think is the case for why they would behave as they are,
okay,
I
what
think.
is it?
All right? And that would be if they see it as, well, it's true. We could pick up votes. I mean, after all, they could have picked up votes with Sanders and
Right.
maybe won, and Trump would never have been president. But they weren't willing to do that. Why not? Well, because it's a Pandora's box from their point of view, right? Once this stuff gets rolling, how far will it go? Do we really want to legitimate, the more aggressive, um, I don't know, politically sophisticated attempts to win a better society, what will we unleash if we do that? I mean, they still may be afraid of the 60s. I don't know what it is. So they put a lid on how far they will go. And they stop Sanders, and they stop, and I I don't think this is inconceivable. On the one hand, they seem too dumb, and on the other hand, but it does make sense, right? It's a rational argument for the fact that they're risking losing, right?
Yeah.
Because they see it as even a bigger loss if they win, and then they've unleashed this uncontrollable set of desires. You know what I mean? I don't know
Yeah.
whether that's it.
You maybe, and I think sometimes people left overstate the power of the funders, whether it's APEC or rich people. But I do think that is a factor also, like people like, the ex-owners of the Dallas Mavericks, Mark Cuban being a major advisor to Harris Walton, being very much against some of the antitrust stuff that actually Biden has been
Right.
decent on, the National Labor Relations Board. So that may be a factor too, like the media
Yeah.
stuff you were talking about. But anyway, it just seems terrible, like in every single way.
Yeah. It's uh it's very frustrating. It means it's very hard to win a new world, a new society. But maybe right now we can stop the march toward the right, um, and then continue on and try to win going toward the left. One of the issues, I know there's another issue that you are concerned with or concern yourself with greatly, and which is very present in all of this, not just in the US, but also throughout Europe, which is immigration. And I was struck, and I don't know what you think about this. I was struck, even though we talk all the time, I was struck by the approach of Trump and Vance to the nonsense of the cats and dogs, eating the cats and dogs. Okay, so they're not stupid, right? I mean, I know it seems like they're stupid, but I don't think they are stupid. And so somehow they feel that when they say crazy stuff, they are speaking to people and people are hearing them. And so I tried to think about that. And to me, it didn't sound like the driving force of what they were saying about what was going on was around race, or that it was around it seemed to me to be that it was around some kind of cultural difference, that the incoming people were a threat, a cultural threat to your way of life, um, because they were different. And I'm not saying there's anything good about the whole situation, but instead of seeing them as idiots, it might behoove us to notice that he's been president once and he's almost tied now. And maybe they do have some ideas about what they're doing and why it works.
Okay, so let me respond. So we agree it's important that Trump loses. I like the position of the uncommitted group that I was somewhat involved with in Washington, of saying we want Trump to lose. Voting third party in this election doesn't make sense how small they are, but not openly endorsing Harris. So we kind of agree, swing states, it does matter. Saying that, again, I mentioned how horrible the Democrats have been on climate change. And I
Right.
think we see all over the world, you have these growing authoritarian, maybe even neo-fascist groups throughout Europe, uh, and not just Europe, someone like Argentina, Chile, uh, also really pushing this kind of dehumanization of immigrants. But it pushes these center parties like the Democrats so much to the right too. Again, if you listen to Harrison Walz, it was all about securing the border. There was nothing positive about immigrants. And I'm struck, even though it's Republican mayor and governor in Springfield, Ohio, which is mainly the thing of the Haitians, eating the cats and dogs. So I do think there's race involved. I mean, Haitian,
Yeah.
is sort of the bête noire of the Trump thing, but them saying, that it's really revitalized the town economically, culturally. Even some employers saying the Haitians have really been a positive asset in a lot of
Yeah.
these declining towns. You've had this. So the lesson I draw is seeing immigrants as something positive. And the interchange is good, like restaurants, like people, there's interchange. So to me, I think we need to argue about immigrant justice, not only economically, like you run, like a lot of the economic arguments about driving down wages, causing higher unemployment is ridiculous. There's so many studies that I could go into that challenge that, but seeing something positive in it. And I think the
Well,
uh,
that's what we should.
we should do. That's what I'm saying. We should do it.
Okay. All right.
But I'm
Well,
saying
that's fine. I don't disagree, but I'm see. I don't. I just try to understand them, right? I don't think Trump and Vance thought they were winning votes in what's the city that
Springfield, Ohio.
what are yeah. I don't think they
Springfield,
were winning vote. I don't think they thought they were winning votes in that city, right? I
correct.
think what they were doing was playing to even audiences where there are no immigrants, right? Because that's where the numbers are, really, in some sense. Um, and the fear, it's like the great replacement nonsense, right? There's some kind of feeling of losing something, and it isn't just grotesque, i.e., losing white dominance. It's something more, and it to ignore it, I think, is trouble for us. But
Yeah, but I'm saying, Michael, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying I'm also blaming the Democrats for not arguing a more
doing
positive.
more, sure.
Right. So it's I'm different. I mean, Walton debate did criticize Vance about because Vance saying, whether it's true or not, to alert the country to this immigrant fear. And yeah, I think we need to challenge economic stuff, like I was saying,
But
but also by pushing full employment policies, anti-austerity policies, so people don't see if there's, like the whole thing, Trump of immigrants
of
taking
course,
jobs with black people. So I think we need to challenge it, but I'm also saying culturally seeing it as something positive. Uh, is I think what I wish the Democrats would do it. I don't expect them to do it, but I think we need to do that more, as opposed to just saying immigrants don't they don't cut wages or jobs and so on. They help Social Security by providing
yeah. But
pay.
what if the other side is
Yeah,
not thinking wage cuts, et cetera, but is thinking um, the the tone and style of life is going to change because there are lots of people who have a
right.
different tone and style of life. And the person doesn't even necessarily have to say, and their tone and style of life stinks. They just have to say, I don't want mine to change. I think they're appealing to that. I
I
don't know
agree.
that this is the case, but I think that's a big part of what's going on, probably in Europe also. In
Yeah,
some places, it's even valid. I mean, suppose you've got a town or a city of, some 100,000 people. If 10 or 15 or 20,000 people come in from elsewhere, it doesn't have to be Haiti. It could be Germany that they're coming in from. And it might scare people and cause a change, cause resistance. I'm not sure that isn't true. I don't know. I'm not saying there's no racism involved. Of course there's racism, because once you're afraid, then you pile on. But there's something more happening, I think.
so maybe a slight optimistic hope. One of the states with the highest amount of immigration is Arizona. And
Yeah.
when we talk about immigration in the United States, it's still the largest number are Latino. And I do think the racism is part of it. Like there's much more anti-Latino than there is anti, for example, South Asian, because there's a large
Sure.
Indian, or German, like you were saying, but a lot of Indian thing. And I know in Olympia is really welcome that out to South Asian Indians, which are a really growing population. But going back to Arizona, both from people I know who are organizing there and polls I've read, there really is this divide between younger and older people. So it's kind of agreeing with what you're saying, but what I'm adding to what you're saying is people going to schools with immigrant kids. The attitude is really, I mean, even more than most issues, an age difference. And I hope that will continue because of the interchange, seeing that
Sure.
it's not something to be afraid of.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do think it's an issue way beyond the election that how do we build a movement, yeah, that really pushes immigrant justice, eventually calls for open borders. I know that's a ways away, but I think the argument's pretty really strong. Borders are very artificial. And again, I was thinking with the people, all these people in Florida saying they want to move to safer places. Well, why is that different from somebody from Honduras who's also facing drought, who to survive, climate refugees? To me, they should have rights too. But how do we do that in a principled way, support immigrant justice, but also challenge this real threat of this authoritarian slash fascism, which we agree is really a danger, whether Trump wins or loses in the United
Yeah.
States and much of the Europe too.
Yeah. I mean, the day after the election, if Trump loses, okay, there'll be some elation, and then they'll be back to business as usual. Um, but business as usual with Trumpers, with the people who have voted for him now feeling that they've been dissed again, that they've been ignored again. And if that's why I think it's sort of exemplary that to the extent it's the case, that the Harris campaign is actually sending workers, staff out into the rural areas to talk, um, because it's necessary. I mean, the people who say anybody who votes for Trump, I don't want to talk to them. I don't want them near me. I don't want them. And there's plenty of that's a wide sentiment,
Right.
um, and that's a horrible sentiment because it confines us. It consigns us to defeat. Um, Not necessarily to fascism, but certainly to not being able to win anything truly, worthy. And so somehow we have to get past that. I mean,
It's
some
hard
people are
because
clearly getting past for it, but it's hard. Yeah.
it's hard because my guess is, let's say Trump loses the election, which I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not that good at predicting. I thought Clinton would win in 16. That probably the majority of people who support Trump will think he won the election anyway. And we do live in these pretty different worlds. And I see that in a lot of different things. Of you have a certain news source, and that's all you see, and social media contributes to that. It's not that easy to challenge it,
No, I
but
know.
we have to. I agree with you.
I'm not
Yeah,
saying it's easy. I'm just saying it has to happen.
we
Um,
should.
yeah. All right. Well, we're 1 minute to 1 hour.
Okay.
Um, so is there something that you want to bring up that we haven't touched on before we come to an end?
Okay, and I also enjoy talking with you, Michael. One issue which I'd mentioned before, and I find really difficult now because I haven't even mentioned, I think among a lot of people I work with, even if they're involved in Palestine, there really is this nihilism.
Move your
That,
hand. Yeah.
there really is this nihilism of just the world is coming to an end, whether it's going to be nuclear war, which is actually a real fear, which we haven't mentioned, the climate even more. Uh, abortion being criminalized, etc., fascism, of a lack of hope. And I still believe that so important is that we have a vision of a different society. So I think the work you and Robin and the Real Utopia group of visualizing a different society, of course, on a strategy, I find some interest. And a lot of people do think it's pie in the sky, but it does seem as important as ever to have that, with maybe more on some strategy and how we move forward. So
Yeah.
I do really want to stress this idea of the need for that, even if it isn't the first thing on people's minds.
Well, obviously, I agree.
Right.
Um, but that last addendum has now sort of occupied me more. I used to feel like absent vision is absent hope, and absent hope is settling for not much, and also absent inspiration and absent etc. And so it infects the movement. And so you have to have vision to have hope and to have uh, to be able to orient yourself, to be able to, have what you want, be in tune with what you're doing. But I began to feel that the absence of strategy that's convincing was just as big a problem. That it isn't just that there's no alternative, but that you can't win, even if there is an alternative. So you get people slowly but surely to believe in the possibility, but they don't believe you can win. And you're right back where you started. You're right back in cynicism and in so somehow we have to do both. And
Yeah.
it it staggers my mind that for 50 years the left has not elevated having a shared answer to the question, what do you want? And also a shared answer to the question, okay, broadly, convincingly enough so I can give my time to it. How do we get it? I just, it just, to me, it feels as dumb as being liberal and thinking you're going to change the world. It's not,
So I
I
know
hate
we're
to
going
say it.
over. Let me make
It's
a
okay.
few responses of stuff I wanted to share. Okay, for me personally, I have a little bit less hope than I had 50 years ago, even though I never thought we were going to win necessarily in my lifetime. But I think for me, but also many people I work with, mainly on Palestine, I think people feel it's the right thing to do. So that's not enough, but that I do want to stress that as important. Secondly, since I've been a teacher for many years at university with always one foot in the more the activist world and one foot more in the academic world, and kind of feeling drop in between, not feeling at home with either one. But I feel a lot of the academic left, particularly people around economics, political economy, which is my background, is somehow feeling if you can show how capitalism is even worse than you think it is, that's going to make people radicals. And it does exactly the opposite. The
Yeah.
nihilism, escapism. I live in such a beautiful area, so it's easy to go camping. Why go to a meeting, right? And then, thirdly, and this is something, Michael, you and I have talked about, which we both agree on, and this is more true of younger people, but it's not just true. I know a lot of people I know, like think of meeting with a lot of union people on Tuesday night 2 days ago, is they'll agree with anything you say about how bad things are. But compared to, let's say, the 60s and 70s, I think the early 70s was a very active period too. I don't use the
Yeah.
decade thing, that the idea that we can actually change it. And part of it's a lack of a strategy, right? And seeing how weak these third parties are. Even most movements aren't that strong these days. It's really hard to get people, you can't really use it by words. And I guess one last thing, and maybe this is more true of me, uh, But I know other people seeing, countries we've had hopes for. I've taken classes to Cuba, Chiapas, the Zapatistas, uh, Venezuela. I worked in Nicaragua for the Sandinista in '88, and seeing like Cuba's really, I'm not. I mean, the economic situation is really horrible there, and Venezuela and Nicaragua, the words are good, but the practice is horrible. Nothing to do with liberation, socialism, really top down economically. Major problems, especially Venezuela. So there's not really places to point to. You can point to the Zapatistas. I think some of the stuff going on in Rojava uh, with the Kurdish population is positive, but it's kind of on a small level. So the lack of examples, I think, makes it also seem pie in the sky what we're talking about. It hasn't affected me, but maybe having, I think, an analysis that capitalism cannot solve the problems, another world is possible, keeps me going.
Yeah, I don't think it's an accident that you keep going. And I do think that's a big part of it, and other people who we know. Um, but there's no alternative to there being an alternative. We there
I like that.
we have to have an alternative, so we pursue it until we have it in hand and until it's shared, and then we have to have strategy. Same thing, uh, and but it's a lot to ask people, to fight the good fight and lose, and
Yeah,
that's what it feels like to people. And it's a lot to ask people to be on the side of the angels when you think the angels are morons who get killed.
right.
It's just not enough. So you do have to have vision and you do have to have strategy. But I don't even agree with you when you say not in our lifetime. Well, maybe not in our current lifetime, which could be the next 20 minutes. But 20, 30 years from now, I don't think there's any way to say there won't be big changes. I know people,
Yeah,
once change gets moving, it moves. To me,
yeah,
we haven't even started yet, right? In other words, I'll get depressed if there's a really effective, good, visionary, strategic movement that folds up. But all the things that you talk about, the examples that have existed and that now evidence all these problems, I think it was built in from scratch. So to me, it's not our best shot failing. You know, I always sort of feel like when we go back and we explain that the New Left had all sorts of problems and people get mad at us who were in the New Left. And to me, it makes no sense. If there were no problems, that would be depressing because that would mean we were as good as you could be and we didn't win. The fact that we weren't as good as we could be gives reason for hope. We could do better. And the same thing is true of all those failed examples. Um,
yeah.
so I do
I'm,
still think that, it's the same as it was. Uh, the path is still there to create that new world. We just have to get on it.
yeah.
And
So,
it's not easy, but it's possible.
yeah, I think with the failed examples, the role of U.S. imperialism is so
Yeah,
central. But I do think a problem is many people I know who still seem sympathetic to like Nicaragua, Venezuela, they reduce everything to U.S. imperialism. I think, like you're saying with the New Left, there were definitely repression is major. Look, what happened to the Black Panther Party, but there always were internal problems too, like maybe talking about you were saying about the Trump people, arrogance toward working class people, not maybe using the word
yeah,
deplorables like Clinton, but having that attitude.
yeah, and not reaching out and not understanding and not taking leadership from others, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I think so. But see, I think it's true also of imperialism and of police power and everything. That's the way the world is. whining about, I'm not saying you're doing that, but whining about the fact that there's imperialism and it will fight, there's cops and they will fight, there's repression and they will fight. Okay, that's the way it is. The reason all that succeeds so easily or with difficulty, but it does succeed, or it has to date, is because we haven't been what we could be. There's an old song. We have they have the guns, we have the numbers. Well, we have to have the numbers before that becomes true, and we haven't had the numbers, and and that's the problem, and it's on us.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed, for example, in this area, in terms of the police and the FBI, I think there really is an issue of repression, right? It's real.
Sure.
I've dealt with a lot of repression in my life, but I really try to make clear of not overstating it, because I do find a lot of people these days is self-censorship. They so much talk about the power of the state, of fascism, which is a real threat that justifies doing nothing or
Yeah.
doing very little. I so to me the issue of self-censorship on the left is really a problem too, overestimating the power of the police,
See,
FBI, corporations.
but I don't know how long we're going to go on with it. But is it because people legitimately are being moved by their perception of the power, or is it something else? In other words, is it that saying those things is the mark of being a radical, and one doesn't want to
Yeah.
stray too far from that identity, or that self-identification, or that team that one is on? I don't know. There are things that go on that are there. We can see the irrationality in Trumpers and in the right, but we don't seem to be able to see it that well in our own side. I find I see it in many places, but Stein is an example. That's just mind-boggling. What has she done it now? 3 times? What has she learned? Nothing. Now, Trump became president. Trump's supposed to be an idiot, but they learned, right? So this time he's prepared to replace, I don't know, tens of thousands of bureaucrats. So he'll be able to do what he wants. He actually learned from what occurred, or at least somebody around him learned, and it's a scary lesson that they learned. I don't think Stein has learned anything, or else it's just play acting, right? I mean, why isn't she running only in safe states? I can't fathom a reason other than to be in the front, to get media coverage.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we agree. I
Yeah,
mean,
and
I
it
it's
but that's no wonder we don't win.
yeah. We I think all of us we need, it was maybe done wrong in the 60s, criticism, self-criticism. I think we really need to be positive about people who are trying to change the world, but but also be self-critical.
Yeah,
And I
learn.
yeah. So that's really important to me. I also find a reason is, people in the United States, and this is maybe more true of what I call, I call professional managerial class, but it's true of all classes. You call coordinated class. I think there's also, maybe because movements are not so strong, I hope that's the reason people's afraid to take risks. I think of like people in Palestine. It's taking risks every day. Like being a news person, doing a broadcast. There's a good chance not just you, but your whole family is going to be destroyed. But I find here a lot of people, for different reasons, maybe again using different rationalizations, but not willing to take any kind of risks, even smart risks. And I think if we're really talking about changing this monster, which I think is the U.S., we need to take risks.
Yeah, but it's not. I mean, on 9/11, right? Everybody saw something slightly different. I saw the workers running into the buildings trying to save people.
Right.
So they were taking risks. They weren't leftists, right? But they were
Right.
taking real risks, and they were risking their lives, and they lost their lives. But
Right.
they did that. And then I don't know. I mean, you're right that there's a problem on that score, but I have a feeling it's because people think it's dumb.
Yeah.
It's being dumb to take a risk, or it's being, I don't know. We have to overcome some of this stuff. There's also the lying that is now rampant, including on the left. It's just very disturbing. Um, when there's momentum to overcome all these things, I think change will come. But we need that momentum.
Yeah. And I think, Mike, just we should close, but the thing you were saying about the people going into the buildings in Wall Street, I do think we often see, and maybe this is the optimism in me, people being really cooperative, like saying, taking risks, supporting it, doing the right thing, and
Yeah,
in terms of solidarity. And it's really important for us to highlight those examples too. They're not generalizable, and I still hope as movements grow, it's a chicken egg thing. People willing to take more risks, solidarity become more reality. It's my favorite word, solidarity, but often it's just rhetoric. But doing it in practice.
it's but it's what are you taking the risk for? And I think that's where um a vision and a sense of solidarity and all of it comes into being, where you're not feeling alienated and therefore not interested in taking a risk, or like it's a useless waste of time. It's like rolling rocks uphill only to get hit by them when they roll back down. I don't want to do that. I don't want to take that kind of a risk. And if that's what people see, you know anyway, it's these are difficult times. um
Right.
and yet they're also, I think, promising times. So I'll do what you just said. Yes, Trump being at even, let's say, with Harris, and Harris being not Sanders, and Sanders not being what we really want ultimately, is
Right.
depressing. But um, the labor stuff that's happening, the 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 gender stuff that's happening, the extent of understanding the world, which is much higher now, understanding what's wrong than it was 50, 60 years ago. Um, those are all bases upon which something can emerge. And I think something can emerge, but we'll see. Anyway,
We agree on the last thing.
okay. Uh, I guess all that said, uh, this is Mike Albert signing off until next time. And thank you for being on, Peter. Um,
Thank you, Michael. I enjoyed it.